It was supposed to be just another panel, a high-profile roundtable on national television, discussing the future of criminal justice reform. The network had booked its usual blend of ideological firebrands and legal heavyweights, but there was a quiet tension backstage. Pam Bondi, former Florida Attorney General, was pacing the green room, heels clicking like clockwork. She was confident, rehearsed, and ready. Known for her sharp tongue and no-nonsense delivery, Bondi was already formulating her opening line, something that would sting. Sitting calmly in a separate corner was Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. Dressed in a sleek navy blue blazer with a single silver pin on the lapel, she glanced through her notes without much expression. Her demeanor was calm, but anyone who had followed her rise in Congress knew she didn't come unarmed. The stage lights turned on. The host welcomed the audience and introduced the guests. The air thickened with anticipation as both women took their seats. Then the first question dropped. Congresswoman Crockett, you've been an outspoken critic of recent law enforcement policies. Pam, I know you feel differently. What would you say to Jasmine directly? Pam leaned forward, eyes sharp, voice smooth. I'd say this country needs less outrage and more law. And quite frankly, Representative Crockett's positions often sound like they're written more for Twitter applause than actual policy. The room went still. Jasmine didn't flinch. She uncrossed her legs, leaned toward the mic, and began to speak. Jasmine Crockett's expression didn't change. She gave a small nod, as if acknowledging Bondi's words, or dismissing them entirely. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was level and precise. Well, Pam, she began, her eyes locking with Bondi's, if you're more concerned about applause than accountability, maybe that says more about your time in office than it does about my policy. There was a murmur from the crowd. The host raised an eyebrow. Pam sat back, folding her arms, already preparing a rebuttal, but Jasmine wasn't done. You talk about law and order like it's a slogan. But I live the consequences of broken systems, systems you helped build. You want to talk about outrage? Try talking to the families who don't get justice. Try looking them in the eye and telling them they just need to calm down. Bondi interrupted, that's not fair, but Jasmine raised a hand gently, not to silence, but to signal grace, and control. I didn't interrupt you, Pam. I'm asking for the same respect. The audience shifted. A subtle power shift had begun, and everyone in the room could feel it. Even the host, sensing the moment, leaned in. Pam blinked, clearly not used to being challenged so directly, or so calmly. She glanced at her notes, but Jasmine was already reclaiming the floor. I'm not here for applause, Jasmine said, voice tight. I'm here because I know what happens when politicians value optics over people. And I won't apologize for saying it, not in this room, and not anywhere else. Bondi's face tensed. The cameras caught it all. Pam Bondi wasn't used to being cornered, not like this. She drew a sharp breath, then leaned in toward the mic with that trademark prosecutorial confidence. Well, Jasmine, I served as Attorney General. I've prosecuted real criminals. I've dealt with real victims. You may have your talking points, but I have experience. There it was, the jab. The crowd reacted with a mix of quiet gasps and knowing glances. Bondi had just tried to pull rank. Jasmine tilted her head slightly, her lips parting in a slow smile, not out of amusement, but disbelief. You prosecuted real criminals, she repeated, echoing the phrase like a challenge. You mean like the ones who got sweetheart deals because of who they knew? Or the ones never charged at all because the politics weren't right? Bondi opened her mouth to interject again, but Jasmine pressed forward. See, Pam, experience without integrity isn't a badge of honor. It's a warning label. The audience rippled with energy. Even the host looked stunned. Jasmine's tone hadn't risen, but her words struck like precision-guided missiles. You want to lecture me about victims? Jasmine said, voice now rich with restrained emotion. I've sat with families, not at press conferences, but in kitchens and hospital waiting rooms. And let me tell you, not one of them ever said, "Thank God Pam Bondi was in office." Bondi's smile faltered. Jasmine leaned back in her chair, composed, her hands calmly folded. The camera cut to Bondi. For the first time that evening, she looked unsure. And Jasmine hadn't even raised her voice. There was a pause, a heavy, loaded silence, where even the air seemed to hesitate. Pam Bondi cleared her throat, eyes flicking toward the camera, searching for footing. "Well," she said, her voice thinner than before, "it's easy to grandstand when you've never had to make the tough calls in real time. I didn't have the luxury of hindsight. I had facts, laws, and the pressure of protecting the public. But it was too late." Her tone no longer held the weight it did at the start. The audience could tell she was defending, not debating. Jasmine didn't rush to respond. She let the silence settle like dust. Then she spoke, deliberately. "Protecting the public shouldn't come at the cost of truth," she said. "And let's be real, Pam, for a lot of Americans, tough calls meant getting locked up for things that never should have been crimes to begin with." The host looked frozen, barely able to move on to the next topic. But Jasmine kept going, not because she was angry, but because she was surgical now. "You had power," she said. "And you used it to shield the system, not the people inside it. And every time you call this grandstanding, what you're really doing is minimizing the reality that some of us don't get to walk away from this fight when the cameras stop rolling." She turned her head slightly toward the audience. "I don't get to turn it off. Because this is real life for the people I represent." Pam's face was still, almost stiff. Her smirk, gone. She looked down, then quickly back up, trying to collect herself. But the shift had already happened. Jasmine hadn't just won the moment. She had taken the room. The host, clearly sensing the imbalance, leaned forward with a practiced smile. "All right, let's bring this back to solutions. We've heard strong opinions, now, what policies do you each support that will actually move us forward?" Pam jumped in too quickly. "Well, I've always advocated for stronger sentencing and increased funding for law enforcement. The real issue is lack of respect for authority, and we've seen what happens when we abandon order." Jasmine didn't even blink. "You mean what happens when communities finally demand to be heard?" she asked, voice still cool. "Pam, increased policing isn't a solution when the system itself is broken. You don't fix a cracked foundation by adding more weight." A murmur from the crowd. Pam tried to counter. "With all due respect, you can't reform chaos." And Jasmine responded without missing a beat. "No, but you can reform systems that created the chaos. And I'd rather be part of that solution than keep pouring gas on the fire and calling it leadership." The host cut in, trying to regain control. "Let's stay on topic." "I am on topic," Jasmine said calmly, not even looking at the host. "Pam's talking about order. I'm talking about justice. They're not the same, and they haven't been for a long time." Pam shifted in her seat again, reaching for her water. Her voice had gone quiet. Meanwhile, Jasmine hadn't even broken a sweat. The audience wasn't just watching. They were witnessing a dismantling. It was subtle at first, a few nods from the crowd, a quiet from the back row, but it was enough. Jasmine Crockett had clearly tapped into something deeper. Pam Bondi noticed it, too. She sat straighter, her jaw tight, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I respect your passion," she said, her voice coated in politeness. "But sometimes passion clouds judgment. We need logic, not emotion, when drafting policy." Jasmine's eyes narrowed, but she didn't raise her voice. "I find it interesting," she said slowly, "how often that word, emotion, is used to discredit women, especially when we speak with conviction." A hush fell across the stage. Even the host glanced up. Jasmine continued. "Let me be clear, my passion comes from experience. My logic comes from law. And unlike some, I don't get to separate the two. Because when my constituents are burying sons, or fighting for healthcare behind bars, they're not asking for cool detachment. They're asking for justice with a pulse. Pam's eyes darted to the audience. She could see it, people were leaning forward, listening to Jasmine now, not her. And worse, they were agreeing. The host tried to transition again, but the power had shifted. And Pam Bondi knew it. She had come for a confrontation, but instead, she'd ignited a spotlight she couldn't control. Pam Bondi tried to reclaim ground, and fast. She leaned toward the mic with a forced smile and said, "Look, I'm not here to score points. I just think we need to stop painting law enforcement as the enemy. That kind of rhetoric is dangerous, and frankly, it's irresponsible." Jasmine tilted her head. "Pam, I wasn't painting law enforcement as the enemy," she replied calmly. "But I am holding them, and the systems that empower abuse, accountable." Bondi tried to interrupt, but Jasmine held steady. "See, that's the difference between us. You think criticism is an attack. I think silence is complicity." The audience fell completely quiet. Even the panelists flanking them stopped shuffling papers. Jasmine leaned in, voice lower now, surgical. "And since we're talking responsibility, how many bad policies did you sign off on that you knew would disproportionately hurt the same communities you now say you want to protect?" Pam froze. Just for a second. It was the question she couldn't answer. Not on live TV. Not with cameras trained on her from every angle. She blinked, shifted, glanced at the host. But the silence said it all. And in that moment, Bondi wasn't the seasoned prosecutor or confident analyst. She was just, outmatched. Within seconds of Jasmine's last words, phones across the audience lit up. Clips were already being recorded. Tweets were flying. Even backstage producers were whispering into earpieces with urgency. This wasn't just a segment anymore, it was a moment. Pam Bondi straightened, forcing composure. She gave a brittle laugh and said, "It's easy to sit here now and play the moral high ground. But I made tough calls in real time. You don't know what that pressure feels like." Jasmine didn't flinch. "I do," she replied simply. "The difference is, I didn't use that pressure as an excuse. I used it as a reason to change things." The host interjected with a soft, "All right, let's move," but the conversation had slipped from his control entirely. Jasmine continued. "And let's not pretend I'm the one moralizing. You came in here swinging, trying to discredit me with a smile and a resume. But when it comes down to it, Pam, you underestimated the one thing that matters most in this country right now." Pam raised an eyebrow, silently challenging. Jasmine held her gaze. "The truth. And the truth doesn't care how many interviews you've done. It just waits for someone brave enough to say it out loud." The room erupted, not in chaos, but in that quiet, collective exhale of witnessing a line no one would forget. Backstage, producers gave each other the look, this clip would headline everything. Pam looked to the side, lips tightening. She had walked into this panel thinking she could dominate the conversation. Now she was just trying to make it to the commercial break. The host, now visibly sweating under the studio lights, tried once again to steer the panel. "Let's take a step back. We're here to debate ideas, not make it personal," Jasmine spoke without hesitation. "It's not personal," she said, eyes still on Bondi. "But policy is personal. And when someone comes on here dismissing lived experience as emotional grandstanding, that's not debate, that's disrespect." Pam shifted in her seat, jaw clenched. "I didn't dismiss anything," she replied. "But there's a way to discuss these issues that doesn't involve public shaming or weaponized rhetoric." Jasmine leaned forward, slowly. "Pam, what you call weaponized rhetoric is what my community calls reality. You think I enjoy having to say these things on national TV? I'd love to just talk policy. But too many people are buried beneath policies you once proudly defended. The audience fell into a hushed silence again. Pam was visibly uncomfortable now. Her face showed the cracks, the practiced confidence was gone. And Jasmine wasn't done. You came here thinking this would be easy. That I'd stay in line, nod along, and let you control the narrative. She looked directly into the camera now. But I don't answer to people like Pam Bondi. I answer to the people who don't get invited onto stages like this. A brief pause. And trust me, they're watching. The crowd applauded softly at first, then louder. The host glanced at the control booth. They were way off script. Pam didn't say a word. Because by now, she understood something very clearly, she had picked the wrong person to challenge. The applause lingered just long enough to drown out Pam Bondi's attempted rebuttal. She raised her hand halfway, then slowly lowered it, unsure whether to fight or fold. The host tried again. Let's shift to closing thoughts, but Jasmine was already closing. We always get told to be polite, she said, still speaking calmly. To make our truth more palatable. To soften our edges so people like Pam don't feel uncomfortable. She turned her gaze back to Bondi. But here's the truth, discomfort is where change starts. And if that means people like Pam have to sit in that for a few minutes, so be it. Because my community has sat in discomfort for decades. Pam opened her mouth, then stopped herself. There was nothing she could say now that wouldn't sound offensive, or worse, hollow. Jasmine continued. You had a chance tonight. A chance to really listen. To grow. Instead, you tried to come for me with talking points and condescension. She gestured toward the audience. But this isn't a courtroom where you control the rules. This is real life. And tonight, you lost control. The finality of that sentence hit hard. Pam glanced around the studio. No allies in sight. Just the quiet hum of cameras and the growing pressure of a moment spiraling far beyond her reach. The host gave a small, nervous smile. We'll be right back after this break. The screen faded to black. Backstage, the atmosphere was electric. Producers huddled around monitors, already clipping sound bites. Staffers whispered. Social media interns were racing to push the quote, "Discomfort is where change starts." It was already trending by the time Jasmine Crockett stepped off the stage. Pam Bondi, still at the panel desk, sat frozen for a moment before quietly gathering her things. The usual crowd that greeted her after segments, the PR team, the supportive colleagues, wasn't there. Nobody made eye contact. In the hallway, Jasmine was met with a quiet nod from a younger staffer and a subtle thumbs up from a network intern. She didn't say much. She didn't need to. Her phone buzzed repeatedly, but she ignored it. This moment wasn't about a viral clip. It was about a shift. Across the internet, the video was already exploding. Commentators were calling it a masterclass. Headlines were being drafted in real time. Pam Bondi tries to corner Representative Crockett, regrets it instantly. Congresswoman delivers quiet takedown that shakes conservative pundit. Pam finally exited the studio and found herself alone near the network's private parking lot. Her driver wasn't even there yet. She stared out toward the street, the glare of her own reflection in the glass door more visible than the world beyond it. This wasn't just a bad night. It was a reckoning. The next morning, the headlines were everywhere. Every major outlet, left, right, and center, was covering it. But the framing was all the same. Pam Bondi miscalculates, Jasmine Crockett doesn't flinch. One exchange. One line. Total collapse. Clips of Jasmine's controlled dismantling were spreading across platforms. Edited reels on TikTok, slow-motion recaps on YouTube, bold font quotes across Instagram. Her words had cut through the noise, not by yelling, but by refusing to bend. Bondi's team scrambled. They issued a press release blaming the network's format. Then a late-night tweet tried to reframe the moment as an ambush disguised as debate. But it was too late. The public had already decided, Bondi hadn't just lost the argument, she'd lost control of her image. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett didn't gloat. She didn't post a victory thread. She didn't even mention Bondi by name. Instead, she posted a single photo, her walking off the stage, head high, captioned with just 3 words, "Still standing." Unbought. It racked up millions of views. Commentators called it a generational moment, not because someone got destroyed, but because for once, someone had answered power without raising their voice, and still left the room shaking. Pam Bondi would return to TV, eventually. But she'd never return the same. And Jasmine Crockett? She didn't just win the night. She became the storm.